Eating on demand. Good luck.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us. Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Keir Starmer gives a very big speech today and says about the NHS, it's reform or die. Is he right? Does Labour's war on pensioners continue? Because that might mean that the discount individuals get on council tax if they're living on their own might go in the budget, because he refused to deny it yesterday. And Leader of the Commons, Lucy Powell, now appears to be launching an all-out assault on myself and Lee Anderson being members of Parliament and also appearing here on GB News. I haven't said a dicky bird on this all day, but tonight, let me promise you, I will. All of that comes after the news.
Thank you very much, Nigel. I'm Lewis Mackenzie in the GB newsroom. So Keir Starmer says the NHS is broken but not beaten, delivering a stark message after a damning report into the health service. The review highlights ballooning waiting times, A&E delays and poor cancer care. Speaking earlier, the Prime Minister warned there will be no more money without reform and said big shifts are needed to secure the NHS's future.
Only fundamental reform and a plan for the long term can turn around the NHS and build a healthy society. Now, it won't be easy, it won't be quick, it will take a 10-year plan, not just the work of one Parliament, but I know we can do it.
Ukraine has called on the UK and US to lift restrictions on using Western weapons against Russian targets during a visit by the Foreign Secretary and the US Secretary of State. At a press conference in Kyiv, David Lammy and Antony Blinken praised Ukraine's bravery, but avoided committing to President Zelensky's request to use long-range missiles for strikes inside of Russia. Discussions will continue in Washington on Friday. Harvey Weinstein has been hit with new charges as the disgraced movie producer gears up for a possible retrial. His 2020 rape conviction was overturned in April after a judge allowed testimony from accusers not formally involved in the case. Prosecutors in Manhattan are now investigating new sexual assault claims as more women come forward. He continues to deny all allegations. The 17-year-old boy has been arrested as a part of an investigation into a cyber attack on Transport for London. The National Crime Agency says the teenager was detained on suspicion of offences under the Computer Misuse Act. It comes as TfL says some customer names and contact details had been compromised in the security breach. In a sign that major changes could be ahead for the UK's workforce, health and care work visas applications have plunged by 83% from April to August this year. New figures from the Home Office revealed dependent visa applications also dropped by 73%. Meanwhile, student visas saw a 17% drop, but dependents of students took a sharper hit with 83% decline. In contrast, applications for skilled worker visas rose by 18% over the same time period. A Royal Navy warship has seized £160 million worth of cocaine in the Caribbean, intercepting a so-called narco sub in a joint operation with the US. HMS Trent, sailing around 200 miles south of the Dominican Republic, seized 2,000 kilos of cocaine, marking the ship's 8th drug bust in almost 7 months. And taking to space exploration, 2 civilians just completed the first ever commercial spacewalk. Billionaire Jared Isaacman and crewmate Sarah Gillis floated out from their SpaceX Dragon capsule 400 miles above Earth using experimental spacesuits. Without the usual safety of an airlock, the daring duo tested life support systems in the vacuum of space. Now that the hatch is closed, they are safely inside. Well, those are your latest GB News headlines. More from me at 8 o'clock.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to news alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. Lord Darzi was the Health Minister when Gordon Brown was the Prime Minister. He produced his much-anticipated report into the state of the NHS. It doesn't really tell us anything that we didn't already know. The health of the nation has deteriorated. Spending is poorly distributed. Waiting times have become unsustainable. Cancer care has declined. Austerity hit the NHS hard. Yes, of course, we've inherited a situation that was worse than we thought. And there is a rising demand for healthcare, which is put down solely to the ageing population. Now, off the back of this, Keir Starmer picked up and gave a very major speech today. This was the key line.
So it's reform or die.
Now, of course, I agree with the sentiment, reform or die, but let's talk about this in the context, shall we, of the National Health Service. Starmer goes on and talks about the fact that it's not working. And as I said at the start of this, we all know that. No mention made at any point about the harm that lockdowns did. No apologies from anybody in either party, actually, or anybody in the NHS, the fact we closed it down, the fact we stopped testing people for diabetes, for cancer, for much else. And that's one of the reasons why we've got this enormous backlog. And absolutely zero mention of the fact that the population is now 10 million people bigger than it was when Tony Blair came to power. It's as if we have these conversations, whether it's on housing, whether it's on health, whether it's on crime, and we've completely forgotten the impact that mass immigration and population growth has had on this country. But I wonder just how radical is the Labour Party going to be? Now, Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, wrote a piece in the Times last year that I found really very, very encouraging. But will his boss really let him put in place the reforms that are needed? Well, I don't think so, and here's why. Here's Starmer, again, from this morning.
So the problem isn't that the NHS is the wrong model. It's the right model. It's just not taking advantage of the opportunities in front of it. And that's what we need to change.
Well, I don't agree with that. I think the model is wrong. I think the funding model is wrong. The principle of healthcare being free at the point of delivery, that's all anybody cares about. I don't think the Labour Party actually have got the guts to do it. So you tell me, is it reform or die for the NHS? Farage at gbnews.com. I think it needs to be far more radical than that. I'm joined down the line by Lucy Johnson, the Health and Social Affairs Editor of the Sunday Express. Lucy, the point I was making there is we've heard some talk from, over the past from Wes Streeting about really, really big changes. Did we see that today?
No, we didn't. And before they were elected, he did talk about doing some radical reforms, including getting weekend work in for the doctors. But he hasn't done that. He has paid them more for what they're asking for, and they're still suggesting they may still strike. And interestingly enough, the Darzi report that you mentioned earlier suggests that some of these other models are more expensive. And it's just not true. That we have the Netherlands and Switzerland, for example, that spend just as much of their annual income, or the same amount on healthcare at about 11%, but they don't have waiting lists like we do, and they have high-performing healthcare systems. So it's not true to say that this is the only model that works. There are other models that work better and that spend the same amount.
Yeah, interesting. So what do you think is going to happen here? Because, I mean, he basically says there's no more money until there's reform, genuine reform, but that will take years, and it's just not achievable. He's going to have to pump in more money, isn't he?
Well, they haven't really said what these reforms will be. The Darzi report was very laudable in its aims, but a lot of them were very nebulous. And as you said before, they're nothing new. Successive governments have talked about prevention, but successive governments have tried to increase public health and improve public health, but nothing's really worked. And what we need to do is go out and trial things and see what works and see what doesn't. It's not just about poverty. It seems to be that in many countries, the richer the nation, the fatter and the more unhealthy we get, although poverty is linked. He also talks about having a better IT system. We know that in the Blair-Brown years, we had £10 billion put towards a new IT system, and that was shelved by the next government because it was too expensive. And he also talks about just trying to put money from the hospitals into the community, so moving that. And winter's coming. Keir Starmer hasn't answered the question that was put to him at conference today about what he's going to do in the short term. He seemed to dodge that. But good luck if you're thinking you can move money or close wards or shut down beds and move money right now from hospitals into the community, because we have 7.6 million on the waiting list.
Going to be very tough. Lucy Johnson, thank you very much indeed for joining us here live on GB News. I'm joined in the studio by, well, he said he'd retired, but I knew he hadn't retired, really. Trevor Kavanagh, former political editor of the Sun newspaper, and Scarlett Maguire, former Labour advisor. Scarlett, there's no doubt they have inherited a very, very difficult position, and I accept that, and I understand that. Do you really think they've got what it takes to turn this around?
Yeah, I think they're determined. I actually think Wes will take on Wes Streeting, the health secretary, will take people on because he's not worried about fights. Possibly sometimes one felt in the past too much, but actually, I mean, what they said is there are simple things that you can do. I mean, the thing that I do not remember a time when, you know, we were not complaining about agency staff, and part of it obviously is about recruitment, and and that's why it was really important that you paid people properly, because the problem about the health service was retaining retention. Now, if we're talking about public health, right, she said nothing's worked. Actually, the one thing that has worked, it was the smoking ban in pubs. Much as smoking has gone down.
Not because of that.
Oh, come on. Well, it just happened to be at the same time. I mean, people, very, very much fewer people are smoking, fewer people are taking it up. We now have a vaping problem, and so we do need, they're absolutely right, we need to start talking seriously. But every time you talk about public health measures, I mean, you were opposed to the smoking ban in pubs.
Oh, totally, yeah.
Every time you talk about public health measures, you know, people like you go nanny state. And actually, obesity is one of the biggest problems we have.
No. Look, you know, I mean, life expectancy in America is falling. The richest country in the world, and it's falling because of obesity above everything else, diabetes and everything linked to it. Now, I get the point. There are preventative measures we can take that'll make people healthier, but what I'm really interested in is the model. Trevor, he says the model's fine, but we can reform from within, you know, the strictures of that model. Don't we need to rethink the whole funding model and how we do this?
I was very surprised, actually, to hear Keir Starmer say that the model is fine, because just about everybody else, I don't know of anyone who thinks that the model is fine, including Wes Streeting, who made it very clear before the election that the National Health Service system was broken and needed drastic repair. The big question is the reform issue. I remember vividly interviewing Gordon Brown when he was Chancellor, saying that there would be not a penny for the health service without reform. And there was no reform because the BMA and other vested interests simply block it. And this is what Sir John Bell, the Oxford Regis Professor of Medicine, said today. And I thought very eloquently that the BMA block everything that they're not being paid a lot of money to do. For instance, there's this new injection to lower cholesterol for an entire year at a stroke. They refuse to administer this injection without extra payment. They want their mouths stopped with gold. And that is the biggest problem. Now, all reform costs money. So there's no way that even Wes Streeting, with all the determination that you may feel he's got, is going to do anything without spending that money and paying the people who administer it a great deal more money. And they're already being paid
So
a
the
lot.
VMA are the new obstructors.
There's nothing new about it. The VMA tried to stop the NHS, and what did my Bevan and Urine Bevan say? Give them money. I mean, the problem is Trevor's right. I mean, and actually, that's one of the things we've got to stop. Is we've got to say. I mean, I didn't know about the cholesterol thing. It is completely and utterly ridiculous. And in the meantime, you know, you go into a hospital and people are working their guts out, and then you have doctors saying, "Well, I'm not going to give this. I'm not going to give this injection that will save me work."
Lots of
without
people
extra
are working
money.
their guts out at the sharp end of the NHS, and I know to my benefit that that is true. But the moment you start drifting away from that sharp end, the life or death element, you are into a quagmire of lost notes and bureaucracy. And people aren't working their guts out.
Yeah, I just wonder. If we look at the French model, it's kind of an insurance-based model. They pay a little less than we do now in terms of GDP into health. Their returns, if you believe the numbers, on strokes, cancer and heart disease are very much better than ours. And Lucy made the point, there are other European countries spending similar sums of money. Shouldn't Darcy perhaps have considered maybe a different funding model would be more efficient?
Well, I mean, Darcy looked and said, it can be fixed. It can be fixed. It's going to take time. And it will certainly take money. But I mean, if you look at the basic problems, right, I remember a GP saying to me, if you stop the old people and the obesity, the hospitals would be practically empty, right? So there are a lot of old people that we need to get into the community who should not be in hospital. They shouldn't be in hospital for their sake, and they shouldn't be in hospital because they cost an absolute fortune. We should be doing more preventative stuff so that we don't have lots of. I mean, the thing about obesity is it's not just fat diseases, but you have, you know, hips, the heart,
everything, knees, the lot.
Everything, right?
Of course.
And that's what is actually, we're an unhealthy nation. And that's the problem with the state. You talk about the States, it's an unhealthy nation. And what we've got to, so one of the things we have to do is we have to work out how to become more healthy.
I don't disagree with any of that.
But
I just think we've got to rethink a funding model.
Well, I don't agree.
Where the more money we pour in, it seems the less we get out. And when you think about it, you know, we've been spending 11 to 12% of our GDP on health over the course of the last 4 years. Go back a decade, we were spending 8 to 9%. Well, you ask yourself, that bigger slice of a national cake, is the NHS better now than it was a decade ago? The answer, well, I think you all know at home what the answer is. In a moment, is Labour's war on pensioners going to continue in the budget? Are they going to take away the discount for single people on council tax? It would be called the widow's tax, and yet when Starmer was challenged on it yesterday, he didn't give an answer.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
I've got a question for you here, Mr. Motivator. Each time I will try and do a couch to 5K, and I start, and then it stops, and then I'll have another go. It's baby steps, though, for most of us, isn't it? You've got to start slow, because I also see people go out and run, do that, and then do too much, and they get completely exhausted and think, I can't do this anymore. So what is it? You have to start slowly, right? Is that fair?
Well, with everything that you do need to start slowly. But what's more important than that? You need to identify an activity that suits you. Now, the thing is, you may want to do couch to 5K, but let's say you have a preponderance for swimming. Maybe swimming is what you really like, or dancing is what you like. You find the activity that suits you. And I have to say, you'll never see a happy jogger. They're happy afterwards. They have enjoyed the experience, but they're never happy whilst doing it. But you must start with everything.
Have you ever been out of shape, though? Because whilst I find you really inspiring, I feel as though you've always been in good nick, and therefore it's kind of come easy to you. Whereas I think, you know, there are plenty of people who have a tendency to put on weight. I mean, I can look at chocolate and I feel like I put on weight. You know, and it's a slog, especially if you've taken your foot off the gas for a while. Getting back into it's brutal. What do you know about that?
Well, let me just say this to you, that in the early days, and I can go back, don't forget 71 years, our activity level was much higher. But this is something that's really just happened in the last 30 years. So those 30 years, we have changed. We now spend more time in front of the computer. We spend more time sitting down. So that's why we need gyms and we need to get up. Now, gyms don't suit everybody. And that's why I do free classes. Free club, you can join. Everyone can get access to movement in their home. But you have got to make that first step.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Time for a couple of your reactions to our NHS debate. Janet says, I've worked in the NHS for 30 years. The NHS model doesn't work. It needs to be scrapped. Yes, but replaced with something better. Jerry says, the problem with the NHS is there are far too many managers, so many in fact, that the only solution would be to introduce another layer of management to manage the managers. Wait and see. That sounds, doesn't it, very, very like Yes Minister when they tried to reduce the Department of Administrative Affairs. Now, moving on, it was very interesting yesterday. Obviously, we've had the big row over the winter fuel allowance being taken away from 10 million pensioners. But a question was asked of Keir Starmer yesterday, which he didn't answer. He said, wait for the budget. But it was, could this attack on pensioners, as some see it, go even further? Could it go to the single person discount? And that means if you're living on your own, you get a 25% reduction on the council tax on your property. And there's a lot of speculation about that. And worth noting, actually, while we're on the cost of living, be it council tax, be it electricity bills, gas bills and all the rest of it, that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, well, they're in a very, very good position because in their Grace and Favour homes, they will only have to contribute about 10% of their income to cover all of their services and their utilities. And actually, there's no prospect, even with the energy price cap rise, that will go up. So some people say, well, it's one rule for them and it's one rule for us. Scarlett, you know, do you think this 10 million people paying, you know, they're not going to get their winter fuel allowance? There's serious talk now about the single person discount. It could go even further than that. Have Labour just decided, you know what, the pensioners aren't going to vote for us anyway?
Of course they have.
It feels like that.
No, so if we're talking about 10 million pensioners, right, an awful lot of those pensioners do not need the £300, right? If it was taxed, they'd lose a lot of it in tax, right? The problem is that there is a narrow but very deep band of people who really, really are desperate, who don't have pension credit, but actually, but I mean, frankly, in Britain, there are lots and lots of well-off pensioners. I mean, you know, I might be sitting with two myself. But I have many friends who give it to charity. Other people, you know, I know one woman, I don't know, I have read of a woman who buys a cashmere jumper every year for £200 with it.
But the majority are not in that category.
No,
isn't
actually,
that the point?
the majority of the 10 million pensioners are okay. There is a band, and I think it could have been handled a lot better. And people, and certainly a lot of Labour MPs are feeling very, very unhappy.
But here's the funny thing, Trevor Cabinet. There are a lot of pensioners who've got small, not necessarily particularly significant, but small private pensions that come in, which means they can't qualify for pension credit, therefore they won't get the winter fuel allowance, who are going to find themselves in the next 2 years paying tax.
Yes.
Because all the tax bands have been frozen. I mean, do you see this as a war on pensioners, a cynical?
Well, it does seem as if Labour's got it in for the aged somewhat. I mean, it's not just the heating allowance. There are suggestions, as you say, that the single person discount. There is talk, and it hasn't been denied, about the bus pass being meddled with in some way. And I think that some of the measures that Rachel Reeves will bring in the budget on pension contributions, which is another attack. I personally think that the £300 a year bung, which was Gordon Brown's way of winning the votes of pensioners, was wrong in the first place. It's an anomaly. It's a subsidy which is always going to cause distortions. It would be much better if the money was simply added to the pension. I'm also against the triple lock system for the pension. I think that that's a really costly anomaly. You need to focus on the pensioners, not on those 10 million people who might not need that sort of help.
Might a better way, two suggestions here. One, that you don't give the winter fuel allowance to those who are paying higher rates of tax. That strikes me as being quite a simple way of working out who can afford, not to have that money. And the second one, why not tie pension increases to average wage increases, therefore keeping in line the average working population and pensions?
Yeah, so
wouldn't that be simpler?
I think it would, and I think all of these subsidies and bungs, as whatever you want to call it, bribes for the electorate, could easily have been made much simpler for in the Inland Revenue, or whatever we call it, HMRC. And, the actual implementation of this decision by Rachel Reeves smacks of such appalling hypocrisy when you go back over the period of time since it was introduced, when Labour's constantly harangued the Tories for planning to get rid of it, and indeed warned that it would cost the lives of 4,000 pensioners. From cold. And suddenly, without warning, without anything in the manifesto, nothing in the election campaign, it's gone.
I have to say, sort of final thought on this, Scarlett, sort of slightly more broadly. Sitting there looking at the Labour benches yesterday, we're just a few weeks on from an extraordinary, I mean, we can argue about the electoral system, but an extraordinary victory. The shine's gone off pretty quickly, hasn't it?
Yeah, but don't you remember 97?
Yeah, no, they were like the royal family, the Blairs.
No. When it was a single parent benefit. I mean, there's always something that's very tough. And I actually agree with Trevor that the 300 should always have been targeted. I mean, it was ridiculous to give all pensioners a bung, and we need to target the money at the people. The thing about the triple lock is the reason you can't get rid of it is politics. I mean, of course, rich pensioners shouldn't have. Yeah, absolutely. Wow. And there are an awful lot. I mean, among the pension population, an awful lot of them are rich, but the ones who are poor can do nothing about it. I mean, you can't go out to work. You can't. I mean, that is the problem.
No, and the point I'm making, that not only are those in that £13,000 to sort of £15,000 band going to lose, but those with small occupational pensions are going to be dragged into the tax system next year as well. I think something has gone badly wrong. In a moment, let's talk about defence. Let's talk about our contribution to Ukraine. I know that people are bored with Ukraine, but I want to find out, we're giving massive support to Ukraine, but are we doing so at great damage to our own defence?
Hello, good evening. It's going to be a very cold night tonight with a chance of frost, particularly across northern areas, but also a chance of spotting the aurora or the northern lights across parts of Scotland and northern England. We've got cold Arctic air at the moment, but that will be replaced by Atlantic air as high pressure builds in for the last day of the week into Friday. So that will develop clear skies quite widely, so a good chance of spotting the aurora as far south as northern areas of England, parts of Northern Ireland too. A few showers still clipping the coast of East Anglia overnight tonight, but for many of us it's going to be a clear, dry and cold night. Chance of frost rurally just about anywhere away from the very far southeast. Towns and cities should be above zero by tomorrow morning though, and it will be a fairly bright start to the day on Friday. The sunshine's still got some warmth to it and the winds will be much lighter tomorrow morning, so it should still feel fairly pleasant first thing. Across coastal areas there is still a risk of the odd shower and more in the way of cloud, particularly as we look further north and west to parts of western Scotland, Northern Ireland, where there is a greater risk of a few showers first thing tomorrow, as those westerly winds are bringing in the next weather front through Friday afternoon. That will spread into parts of Northern Ireland, western Scotland, turning the sunshine much hazier as we head towards lunchtime. But elsewhere across the UK, it's going to be actually a dry and fine day, a much more settled day to come tomorrow compared to today. Less of a risk of any of those showers rattling through. It won't feel too bad in the sunshine. Temperatures are still below average, but it's definitely warmer than it has been lately, and it will become even warmer as we head into Saturday as well, as we pick up that westerly wind more widely. Still potentially a fairly chilly start though across parts of England and Wales, but it's quite windy and wet weather will push into parts of western Scotland, Northern Ireland through Saturday, and we'll see the rain persist here all the way through until Saturday evening, and then when it will sink further south into more central areas with further wet weather to come early next week across the north. Bye-bye.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've just had a general election, and I have to say there was precious little talk of defence. Debates about how quickly the Conservatives would get to 2.5% on spending, Labour saying they were aiming to get there. Now there's a defence review, and it seems very doubtful that we're headed towards 2.5%. At least that's the interpretation I get, having watched John Healey, the Defence Secretary, in action. But what I'm particularly keen to talk about is the contribution that we are making to the Ukraine war, and whether that's damaging our own ability to train our own people, and what about our stocks of ammunition, artillery shells, etc. Pleased to be joined by Robert Fox, Defence Editor of the Evening Standard. Robert, we have trained an extraordinary number of Ukrainians, haven't we?
46,000.
Yeah, and the other week in Kent, I saw them leaving Lyd Barracks after their training with their rifles, heading back towards the front. I thought, crikey. What has that meant? What's the impact of that been on training our own soldiers?
Well, the NAO reported that it has deprived a quarter of the training facilities that might otherwise be available for training British soldiers. But it's not quite as obvious as that. Actually, in training, there has been a dividend because the British Army has learned a hell of a lot from Ukraine and training Ukrainians. And the consequences are quite eye-watering in the implications for their own inadequacies.
Right.
Our army couldn't fight that kind of war now because it's so problematic with drones and information and so on. They're underfunded and under-resourced. But the contribution, as far as it has gone, has been quite good for Ukraine. But it has revealed that we can get new equipment, innovative equipment, into Ukraine at speeds so much quicker than you could ever possibly dream of doing for UK armed forces. And
Which sounds bizarre.
It sounds completely bizarre. It's an Alice in Wonderland world. It's full of paradoxes that we could do that for Ukraine, and there is a real crisis in defence. And as you say, of course, that wouldn't come up in the general election, would it?
No. I mean, it really wasn't discussed very much at all. But we're also, I mean, you know, our stock of artillery shells is down to almost nothing.
And we haven't ordered new ones, as far as I could make out from latest checks.
And did I see the other day that of our nuclear subs, that basically, there wasn't one at sea at one point a couple of weeks ago?
There's only one with carrying the nuclear deterrent, but you're absolutely right. We need the hunter-killers. They're all alongside because we haven't built the deep docks. They've just accelerated one. And I think that this is ominous in view of what you've just been describing with health policy. Don't expect too much from the Defence Review. Yeah. They thought it was going to be like the glorious one, again done by George Robertson, who's not my age, for goodness sake. All of how many years ago? 97, 98 it came out. It was seen as a great thing. Ta-ra! And the thing that George gets very sensitive about, it wasn't properly costed. None of them has been properly costed. There's a simple thing, that most of the Defence Reviews you look over the last 20, 30 years, they've been predicated on at least 2.5% growth in the national economy. We're at 1 or under. It isn't there again.
No, I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it? You know, when you've got the Middle East as it is, you've got Ukraine, Russia, who knows what might happen with China, Taiwan, and we've run ourselves down to this degree. How long will the Defence Review take?
They say, I'm looking at Scarlett and Trevor here, I wonder whether they believe it, that they will have a draft out by Christmas. I very, very much doubt it, because I look up the defence bulletins and find somebody else has been brought in as a consultant to do this. I mean, the consultants will be consulting and reporting on each other, as far as I can make out. And meanwhile, we're not getting enough soldiers, men, women, going into the armed services. They're all under recruiting.
Recruitment is at a terrible low.
And it's you've talked about the ammunition.
Yeah.
The equipment, but it's the ammunition and the people. That's the thing that they've got to focus on. And that's the thing. Have you heard John Healey talk about it?
Afraid not. Scarlett, you know, it was kind of Labour in the election campaign, look, we will get to 2.5% as and when we can afford it. Pretty clear from what John Healey is saying that there's going to be no increase in defence spending.
Well, when we can afford it. I mean, there's no point in putting up 2.5% if we can't do anything else. I mean, you know, we do have to protect this country in an awful lot of ways.
It's about priorities, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but there are a lot of priorities for this country, right? I mean, we have to protect the citizens who live here by giving them a decent health service as well. I mean, it's very important.
But isn't, and perhaps I'm being a bit old-fashioned here, isn't defence of the realm actually the single most important role of government?
No, well, what I'm trying to say is...
We're facing an emergency.
What did you say?
We're facing an emergency. You're way off on this, I'm afraid. We nearly had a Chapter 5, well, it was a Chapter 5 incident, with Russian drones, armed drones, flown over NATO member territory. The Romanians, I'm talking about the beginning of the week, asked permission from NATO headquarters. Should they shoot the darn things down with their F-16s? That would have been an Article 5 incident. Mons said no, but it said guide them, push the drones, if you can, towards Odessa. It's going to happen again. You say, oh, we've got to have priorities. Do you know what NATO allies are saying that Britain should contribute? If it's really going to, you know, punch its weight, not above its weight. It's actually about 3.5% of GDP.
The interesting point here, Robert, and Trevor, pick up on this. It's very interesting, isn't it, what Robert said. Article 5, of course, being the clause in NATO where we defend each other. We go to war, basically. Isn't it extraordinary that the incident that Robert's just talked about is getting so little national debate, let alone politicians, but the media aren't talking about it either?
No, and I think that Robert's point that this is an emergency is absolutely true, and it may not have been an issue in the last election, but I suspect it's going to be a major issue by the time of the next election, and maybe very much sooner. And I think that we've been still capitalising on the fall of the Iron Curtain, the Berlin Wall and all the rest of it.
Oh, the peace dividend.
Peace dividend. We've been living off that peace dividend for 25 years. And this is actually very serious indeed, because Putin's watching all of the things that are, and not just Putin, the Chinese and so on, Iran and Korea. So they're looking at the weakness of the West, and we are one of the weakest of the West. I mean, we keep criticising Germany and the European Union, but we're no better. We've got no training, no weapons, and no incoming recruits.
No. What I have to say, I find, as I said, not just the lack of priority in a general election on this very important subject depressing, but the lack of media debate. Robert, of course, you do your bit to try and wake everybody up on this, and we thank you for coming in. My What the Farage moment of today was the statement by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who says, wait for it, I'm not making this up, that prisoners who've been released should jump the housing queue in London, yes, jump the social housing queue and go right to the front, because that's the way they become better people. Good policy, Trevor?
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, no wonder they're jumping for joy and breaking out the champagne and saying they'll vote Labour forever. I mean, if you're going to jump the queue as a convicted wife abuser, drug peddler, you name it. I mean, some very serious crimes have been committed by the people who are coming out early. None of them are likely to find an occupation. They're going to be homeless and they're going to return to crime very quickly. But it's the ones who are prone to the really violent crimes that we must worry about. And I can't imagine, frankly, that the people who are actually already at the top of the queue are going to be very happy about being jumped by some of these guys.
I mean, Scarlett, of course, it's Labour bashing time because they're in government, and you know,
I know,
we know that's how it works. But it is a mad statement, isn't it?
OK, what he meant and what we both know is there is a real problem with offenders going back, right, and reoffending. And one of the reasons that they reoffend is because they've got nowhere to live, they can't get jobs. Now, we're not talking actually about violence. Most people in prison are pathetic, right? They're not violent. They just actually can't manage the world. And so they come out, they do petty crimes again, they go back in, and it goes on and on and on. There is absolutely no question that, I mean, I wish the violent people had not been let out, but those are the people he's talking about, is how actually to begin to get our prison system working so that we don't have reoffending. And one of them is to give people lives when they get out. And that's what he meant. And he certainly wasn't trying to put all these
Well, I tell you what, it came across very, very badly. All I can say on this subject is, you know, one of the people let out of one of those northern prisons had 109 previous convictions. Now, these were for non-violent crimes, but just think of the amount of misery that one individual has heaped on that number of people over all of those years, running their shops, running their businesses. And I'm all for prison being about rehabilitation. I'm all for training, Scarlett, in prison and trying to help people genuinely to learn a skill they can use when they come out. But when it comes to serious repeat offenders, frankly, we need to build more prisons and put them away for a very, very long time. That's my view. Now, in a moment, it would appear that Lucy Powell, the leader of the House of Commons, is coming for me and Lee Anderson. They are suggesting that as an elected member of Parliament, if I'm here talking to these good people on GB News, that somehow that is a conflict of interests. They're coming after us. I haven't said a dicky bird on this all day. After the break, I will.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Let's have a look at this story in the Telegraph, Charlie. This is about Anglican Church, the Church of England, dropping the word church in favour of something a bit more modern sounding. Words such as community. Why are we afraid of the word church?
Well, that's my question. I mean, you got to assume that they think it solves some kind of problem. But I think, you know, there are a lot of people who feel very strongly about their particular religious institution, whatever they all have different names, don't they? And if you rename one, do you have to rename all of them? Can we no longer use an individual name for different religions, community buildings?
Are you religious?
I'm spiritual.
You sound like him. Yeah.
No, certainly.
Oh, don't get any started on me.
Do I believe in a God? Yes. Do I believe in any of the particular gods that are offered to us? Still undecided. But,
I'm like you. I said exactly that.
You two are the same. You two are exactly.
What about you, Anna? Are you particularly religious?
Well, I'm not proper religious. I won't name myself as a religious, but I really do respect religions. And we have bigger problems to think about.
Is it a sign of where we're at in this secular society?
Yes.
We're moving more and more towards that. The Anglican Church feels that the only way to be relevant is to take away any reference to church going, to being religious.
I think if the substance of what you're offering is good, it doesn't matter what it's called. You know, so if people are going to find solace and peace in a place that makes them feel better, they're not going to care too much about what it's called. So I think relabeling it, rebranding it, I don't know, maybe it'll help, maybe it won't, but it's going to certainly upset a lot of people, I should think.
And people whose religion is important to them and kind of central to their lives, you can imagine.
Absolutely.
There's a reason Justin Welby is nicknamed by some quarters the Archbishop of Woke. Maybe this adds fuel to the fire, who knows?
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m, followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain, followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm not a whinger, I'm not a whiner. I'm a very happy, jolly, positive person who's always looking forwards. But excuse me, if you will, I'm going to have a little whinge. So there are 26 House of Commons committees, 26 of them. And would you believe that the 5 members of Parliament elected for Reform UK, each of whom have 800,000 voters behind them, not one of us is on the 26 committees. No, we've been gotten rid of. And today, Lucy Powell, who is Leader of the House, has set up a new committee, a new modernisation committee. When you hear that word, you should always have a slight shiver down the spine. And she herself, unusually, is going to chair this committee. It has 14 members, 9 of them are Labour. And I tell you what they're really going for. They're talking about second jobs, but in particular, what they're talking about is broadcasting. And it says the committee will consider what advantages, if any, outside paid engagements such as media appearances, journalism and speeches furnish to the public versus potential conflicts of interest. Well, folks, I want to tell you this. I don't see any conflict of interest between being an MP and coming here 3 evenings a week for an hour. And by the way, if there are crucial votes, I just won't be here. I don't see any conflicts of interest whatsoever. In fact, I might make an argument that's slightly different, that I'm here with a panel of people. Some agree with me, some disagree with me. We have open debate. I'd like to think that through programmes like this, what we actually do is take what's really happening in politics and bring it to a bigger audience. So I think it's complementary. So all I can say to Lucy Powell is this really affects Lee Anderson and myself. And if you're coming after us and think you can bully us, you've picked on the wrong people. I'm not going anywhere. If you want to martyr me, please have a go. So what about this conflict of interest, Trevor? I mean, I know we wouldn't have thought years ago that MPs would be doing broadcasting, but MPs have always written for newspapers, haven't they?
Absolutely, and this new modernisation committee has a slightly sinister Orwellian or Cromwellian tang to it. I think that there's going to be a lot more coming out of that modernisation committee, which we are ready for. And I think that the target for this is quite certainly the right of centre politicians. And where would they be pointing if David Lammy was still on LBC, for instance? And I think that it's not just right-wing politicians or people like yourselves who appear on GB News. I think it's GB News thereafter, as a voice which is an uncomfortable amplification of many people in this country's political point of views. And I think you actually summed it up there that this is a more valuable way for people like yourselves, who get very little in the way of oxygen in the House of Commons, to get your point across on a more broader spectrum.
And yes, it's a channel that has an opinion, but Scarlett, you know, we invite everyone to come on and say their piece, don't we?
And I'm always in a tiny minority, right? Because I'm always...
A 50-50 is not bad, is it?
Nigel, you disagree with me, Trevor disagrees with me. Come on. No, but actually...
But we
no,
always
let's
treat
talk...
your argument with respect.
You do.
Always.
Lee Anderson doesn't. Lee Anderson has lefty in the corner, which is why I refuse to go on his show anymore.
Well, that's Lee, but yeah.
Yeah, because I'm supposed to take a joke, but the right can't. No, seriously, I'm very old-fashioned. I believe that an MP is a proper job. I think... How much do you get paid? 94,000 a year?
92 or 3.
Yeah, it's 94, which I think is perfectly reasonable.
How many hours a week should I work?
And I think it should be a full-time job. And I just think that
What's
that's
a full-time
enough.
job?
Full-time job is anything up to 100 hours a week. You know that. I mean, you know that lots and lots of people work. I thought
the Labour Party wanted us to have Fridays off and work from home and do a 4-day week.
No, the Labour Party actually knows that people work very hard, and just because, quite reasonably, Keir Starmer says that he would like, when possible, to spend Friday evenings with his family, which is something that he instituted when he was, you know, a very hard-working barrister, and it was his way of of marking out that time, which he doesn't always do, is fine. We on the left, we do work quite hard. But I just think, hold on, and all this paranoia. Gordon Brown thought that MPs should just have one job. Right? This goes long before
So what should I
GBNews.
do? What should I do with my company, which does a variety of things and pays money every month to 5 or 6 different people, depending on what services they provide for me to help me do all the different things that I do? Should I just get rid of them all?
No, I mean, somebody else can run your company, can't they? I mean, it happens over and over again, right? But I just think this thing about having to have, I've got to have this and I've got to earn, what is it you earn, $1 million a year?
No, that's obvious.
Well, that's what you said. I read it in the Register of Interest.
If you read the Register of Interest, you'll see my GB News earnings for August were, do you know how much?
Well, presumably almost nothing because you weren't there, right?
I was there, it was 0. Anyway, we won't argue about that. There's a broader, more important point. Do we want our members of Parliament simply to be party lobby fodder? Is there not some advantage in them having a hand still in the real world?
No, I think what they should also be doing is spending a lot of time in their constituency and finding out, you know, going out and about, right, rather than... I mean, and of course you go on TV programmes. You always have done, frankly, Nigel, long before you were given one.
Sure.
That's why we've all heard of you. The BBC gave you your time.
There's lots of jealousy out there too, I think. There's a lot of jealousy in the Commons, I think. I mean, why, if a Labour... Let's just say, for argument's sake, that a Labour MP is a general practitioner. Might be quite a good thing for he or she one day a month to actually be in the surgery, to talk to people, to hear what's going on.
Yeah, no, and a lot of them, actually, one of the things that MPs do is they quietly write books. But I think, I mean, what a lot of MPs do is they're chairs of things in their constituencies. They do a lot of things for free, right? I think that's fine. I do not understand why MPs have to have a second income.
What do you think, Trevor, overall? Do you think Labour are going to crack down hard on this?
Probably, if they can get away with it, and I think they are in a position where they can get away with almost anything at the moment. I think your point about GPs is quite interesting, because what do they do in the National Health Service for medical practitioners who want to do some private work on the side? They allow them to do it, and they allow it, and they have allowed it for a very long time in order to make the NHS work. What's the difference?
Not much.
None.
Not much. No, I think I rather agree. I don't know. Jacob, you've been through all of this.
Well, there are 2 really important things. First of all, Scarlett, being an MP is not a job, it is an office. And the difference with an office is that you are answerable to your voters for how you've conducted yourself. And if they don't care if Nigel is a presenter on a TV programme, that's their business, nobody else's. And the second thing is that you cannot change conditions of membership without legislation. That it is by law that MPs are elected, and by law that they are restrained in what they can and can't do. It is not sufficient to do this by motion of the House of Commons. And if, Nigel, you were ever suspended by the House of Commons by a mere motion, you should do what Wilkes did and stand in a by-election, and if your voters think your behaviour is good enough, it's good enough. And if you stand in such a by-election, even if you're not standing as a Conservative, which by then I hope you will be, I would encourage people to vote for you against these absurd rules. It should be for voters to decide whether the MP is good enough. And this is purely vindictive to stop Conservatives putting across a Conservative argument, and I use a small C as well as a large C.
Well, Jacob, I must say that's brilliantly put, and in fact, I'd never thought that I should take you on as a paid political consultant, but clearly I should, because, no, I mean, I meant what I said at the end of my little monologue on it. If they want to martyr me, that's fine.
You will win.
I'll find a by-election. I mean, Jacob's point about it being an office is quite a good point, isn't it?
Look, I just think that we need to take being an MP seriously. And I think that if you've got a programme, is it now only 3 nights a week? That it's not taking it very seriously.
Should I have weekends off as well? Holidays?
I
don't have any.
Come
I
on,
work all the time.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
When the situation was reversed, if I had votes, Nigel stood in for me and did an extra hour.
We did it.
Being an MP was my first responsibility as an office holder. And GB News has been completely understanding about this. Sometimes I could only give 20 minutes notice that I wasn't going to be in, and it was taken care of.
We dealt with it. And he does it brilliantly, and in a moment you're going to get an hour of Jacob. But first, and thank you very much to my panel this evening, as ever, let's get the weather with Annie Shuttleworth.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. It's going to be a very cold night tonight with a chance of frost, particularly across northern areas, but also a chance of spotting the aurora or the northern lights across parts of Scotland and northern England. We've got cold Arctic air at the moment, but that will be replaced by Atlantic air as high pressure builds in for the last day of the week into Friday. So that will develop clear skies quite widely, so a good chance of spotting the aurora as far south as northern areas of England, parts of Northern Ireland too. A few showers still clipping the coast of East Anglia overnight tonight, but for many of us it's going to be a clear, dry and cold night. Chance of frost rurally just about anywhere away from the very far southeast. Towns and cities should be above zero by tomorrow morning though, and it will be a fairly bright start to the day on Friday. The sunshine's still got some warmth to it and the winds will be much lighter tomorrow morning, so it should still feel fairly pleasant first thing. Across coastal areas there is still a risk of the odd shower and more in the way of cloud, particularly as we look further north and west to parts of western Scotland, Northern Ireland, where there is a greater risk of a few showers first thing tomorrow, as those westerly winds are bringing in the next weather front through Friday afternoon. That will spread into parts of Northern Ireland, western Scotland, turning the sunshine much hazier as we head towards lunchtime. But elsewhere across the UK, it's going to be actually a dry and fine day, a much more settled day to come tomorrow compared to today. Less of a risk of any of those showers rattling through. It won't feel too bad in the sunshine. Temperatures are still below average, but it's definitely warmer than it has been lately, and it will become even warmer as we head into Saturday as well, as we pick up that westerly wind more widely. Still potentially a fairly chilly start though across parts of England and Wales, but it's quite windy and wet weather will push into parts of western Scotland, Northern Ireland through Saturday, and we'll see the rain persist here all the way through until Saturday evening, and then when it will sink further south into more central areas with further wet weather to come early next week across the north. Bye-bye.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could be the next Great British Giveaway winner with a whopping £36,000 in tax-free cash